if you can't hit a T-ball, you're not hitting a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, right? If you can't get him to out a toy, how are you going to get him to out a man? That's way more valuable to the dog. That's going to create a lot of conflict. Let's get a whole bunch of success with the tug, a whole bunch of success with the ball on the rope, a whole bunch of success with the wedges, and then we'll move up to the human.
We want to make sure the dog is not expecting a toy every time he comes back. And this is where I see some handlers go wrong. Like, they had the right intention. They're like, I want to use positive reinforcement. I want, when the dog comes back, I want to give him a toy. And they never leave that.
Right. And then the dog expects something, anything.
Yeah. And now we've got a problem. Welcome to Police K9 Radio. Rich, what's going on?
Kind of a big day today. We're going to talk about something that affects everybody in the canine world. We're going to talk about outing your dog, when you should out your dog, what's too long, what's not long enough, what's the proper way to do it. Are we doing it physically at the dog? Are we doing verbal outs and bringing the dog back to us? Are we doing all of those things? Are we doing none of those things? Everything out.
Everything out. And if you're not listening to this one on YouTube, you're going to want to pull this one up. We're going to show 10 to 12 videos during this podcast, and it's going to kind of maybe, we're not the best spokesman sometimes when we're trying to relate exactly what we're talking about. So the pictures and the videos and stuff like that will make it a little bit clearer. But this podcast is on the heels of the Mike Kmeciek podcast, in which we talked about Rosenbaum versus City of San Jose mainly. And there were some things that came out of that case, and there's like this big stir in the industry, at least out here in the Ninth Circuit, where now we've got these two camps of like, hey, everything's got to be a verbal out. As soon as you see the guy's hand, you're like, out here, right? And then you've got the other camp that's like, I don't even think I need a verbal out. We've heard that in the industry, right?
Recently.
And so we're going to address both of those things, tell you where we fall in that. But first off, let's talk a little bit about our last podcast with Mike Kmeciek, because I want to make sure I clear some things up there. In that case, if you remember, and if you haven't watched it, you should check that one out before you watch this one. But in that case, the suspect was in a seated position. His hands were up. The dog was biting him. And then it took about 22 seconds for the officers to kind of arrange themselves in a position where they could then do a lift-off with the dog or a tactical out, take positive control. Couple things on that one that I think make it a little bit different than some. Number one, there were a number of officers on scene. They did have lethal cover. The suspect was in a kind of a seated position. They could see his hands. And again, that was an interlocutory decision.
Do you even know what that means?
Interlocutory decision.
No, okay. So if you just say it again,
it's interlocutory. The emphasis on the first part, interlocutory. It's one of those words that kind of make you sound smart. But thanks to Mike Kmeciek, he was able to dumb it down enough,
thankfully,
for both of us to understand that, which just makes it basically the facts of the case have not been established in court yet, and so they take the plaintiff's best version, and so the officers were denied qualified immunity at this point. As Mike said, if there's good representation there, he thinks there's a really good chance that the officers will get qualified immunity. But this brings up one of those things that, as an industry, we always have these knee-jerk reactions, right? We saw it in Smith v. Hemet, for those of you that have been around long enough. More recently, we saw it in the Lowry decision, where I think the Ninth Circuit said burglary. Initially, they said burglary was not a serious offense. All of a sudden, agencies are like, we're not deploying on burglars anymore. We're not deploying them into buildings. Agencies are getting rid of their dogs. They're suspended. And we wind up doing this to ourselves, where we do this knee-jerk reaction. We come up with all these policies, more restrictive policies. And in this case, my advice is like, let's
see how it gets adjudicated.
Let's let it play out, right? Before we start changing policies.
Does Ninth Circuit ever get overturned?
I think Mike said it was the number one court in all of the land that gets overturned. So, yeah, and then full disclosure, I mean, that is they're the court that oversees and presides over a lot of what we do here in California. So, which brings me to my next point. Rich and I really don't talk a lot about what we've done or what we're doing now as far as stats or numbers. So, I think it's important to kind of talk a little bit about ourselves, and so that to give kind of the credibility of what we're about to talk about on this podcast is based upon our experience, because we train through experience. Our experience and then our experience of our handlers over the last number of years. So to put that into perspective, we'll talk a little bit of numbers. So Rich, talk about your canine history.
I ran 3 dogs, dual-purpose dogs, all 3 of them dual-purpose dogs. During that time, I was also a use of force instructor at the police department where I ran those 3 dogs. So I had a pretty good understanding of force as it applies to all the other types of force that we use in law enforcement, plus the police dog. Worked street crimes, so I did a lot of proactive, parolee, probationer, jump outs type stuff. So I guess I kept my feet wet in the force realm, in the search and seizure realm, and I ran 3 dogs at the same time. Currently, I think we have dogs that we've either raised or trained. We have 53, 54 dogs on the street working right now that we've raised or trained. Several of them starting off at puppies, so we've gone puppy to adulthood, working on the street. Several green dogs from overseas, green dogs from the United States that we've turned into police dogs that are out there working. And on the pet side of things, which if you'd asked me 10 years ago which one was easier, I would have thought for sure pets was easier. Hands down, pets are way more difficult than police dogs. We easily go through 30 to 40 board and trains a month, several group classes, several lessons. So we're touching 50 to 60 dogs a month in a teaching aspect, plus the police dogs that we're raising. So yeah,
that's
a little experience.
A lot of touching of dogs right there.
A lot of touching of dogs. Yes,
that's
sir.
a whole nother podcast.
Different channel.
Yeah, and so I 22 years of law enforcement. I worked 4 dogs on the street. I also trialed dogs, had a PSA club. And I trialed my police dog who took top dog 2 years in a row.
Whatever.
No big deal.
We weren't competing at the same time or anything.
We didn't, did we?
We crossed over.
Did we?
A little
bit.
Yeah. It was always like, fucking Gregg's here.
No.
Actually, Brett was the one that always threw us off.
Brett was the guy with the slow shepherd
Slow
that
shepherd.
just seemed to do everything
he's
just
getting
right.
a call off.
You're like, God dang it. There's always that guy that pulls up. You're like, God dang it. He had to come out. So, and I think in our group, we've got, out of all of our trainers, we probably, I should know this. I think we probably have 50 years of canine experience and over 200 physical apprehensions, bites just within our group. If you break it down in organization, we've oscillate somewhere around 100 dogs within our training organization, within DTAC Canine. I would venture to say we have well over 10,000 deployments, and we are somewhere in the range of around 2,000 physical apprehensions and bites. And again, the reason I bring this up is because that's what we're going to be talking about, like when and why and how we teach it. And we have that student mindset. So the way we're teaching it today, we might not be teaching it in 5 years. And I guarantee the way we're teaching it today, I was not doing 20 years ago, 100%. So we keep trying to evolve with the times. But today, specifically, this whole podcast is going to be on when we need to verbal out our dog. And, we talk about the 2 camps. Let's just clear this up right away. You got the I don't verbal out at all, and I verbal out on everything. We are in between. And so just like everything in life, right, there's a balance. But I will say this, probably 90% of the time we are taking physical control of the dog and then asking for a verbal out. So rarely are we verbally out from a distance.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about that as it pertains to arrests with suspects without the dog. And then obviously we add the dog into the mix. A lot of that remains the same. Same with building searches, right? We see new canine handlers that come in, they have a hard time searching a building with the dog. We're like, hey, how would you search it without the dog? And they do really good at that. We're like, now add the dog. It makes it easier. Same thing with use of force on a suspect. Almost always that use of force happens within arm's distance. That changes a little bit with the dog because now we have the ability to send the dog after somebody, or we have the dog out in a search. But if we have a dog out in a search and the dog is 30, 40, 50 yards away from us, I would argue, and I think you're in the same camp as me on this, that maybe your dog is too far away from you and has the potential of getting into something that you don't have total control of. So for example, if we're searching a backyard and you start on the 3-4 side and you go into the backyard, if your dog ends up biting somebody, if you're on the 3-4 side and your dog ends up biting somebody on the 1-2 corner because it's gone all the way around the house and made access over here, I would argue that your dog is too far away from you for you to have legitimate control over that dog. So then if your dog bites somebody over there, now you've got an issue on out time, because if this guy gives up,
Sure.
or if it's the wrong guy, and you have to go all the way around and somewhat tactically and safely move to that human, you're going to be behind the 8 ball on that because you're just so far away from your dog. So control during searches, I think, matters. But typically when we're using force on somebody, it's because they're within close range to us, which means rarely am I going to be in a position to verbally out the dog back to me, because I have to go hands-on, because the guy is here, or the gal is here, my dog's here, everything makes sense because it's within reach, that I'm probably going to physically out the dog, e-collar, break stick, lift off, any of those things, because I'm in such close proximity to the dog that it just doesn't make sense in most applications where we're using force to do a verbal out.
Sure. And so the courts are pretty specific on this thing. And if you listen to our last podcast, you know this, right? There's 2 things we need. We need compliance or surrender, and we need control. And so once you have those things, so on the flip side of that coin, right? And because things aren't always black and white, right? It's not like I'm always verbal outing or I'm always doing a lift off, right? So if you have a situation where your dog engages someone and you have those things, you need to move expeditiously. That doesn't mean you have 25 seconds to be like, okay, you glove up, you're going to be taser, you're hands-on, we're going to move forward, and now we're taking our time to get the dog off. No, that's quite the contrary. Is we need to move expeditiously, we need to get up there, we need to get the dog off pretty quickly. So pre-planning is everything in this situation, and that's everything in law enforcement. Hey, slow down, especially in canine. Slow down, come up with your plan. Everybody should know what they're doing. And you should have already trained this with your shift, if you haven't, about the whole arresting procedure.
Yeah, and the analogy we used in that last podcast I brought up was the 40 millimeter. Somebody's far enough away that I'm using the 40 millimeter to gain compliance. Once they say I give up, I don't get to keep shooting them as I approach them. Now we have to move up there while they're incapacitated or while they believe that they have been affected enough to want to stop the fight. Now it's our job to go up there. I don't get to 40 millimeter. He gives up. Okay, like let's get a shield, bring everybody up, you cover over there. Like you said, we don't have time for that. We have to move safely, but we have to move up there and take control, or we're going to start 40 millimeter again, or we're going to start dog biting again.
So let's talk about for the one camp. When are we verbal outing our dogs?
I can think of some experiences that I've had. Dog bite under a house in a crawl space.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
Suspect got bit, said, hey, I don't like this anymore. I give up. Didn't make sense for me to crawl under the house, go into a place where I'm obviously unsafe.
No, there's raccoons and stuff under there.
And then physically out the dog, and then I'm stuck under a house with somebody. So it made more sense verbally out the guy and then have him come to me. Addicts, same thing. And then like we talked about before, sometimes the distance is greater than I can reach the dog and the suspect in a timely fashion. So I have to get the dog back to me.
Sure. I'll give you another one, and we like to set this one up at training where we have the suspect in the back corner of the room. There's a bunch of crap everywhere, right? And we like to manipulate.
You mean like a real house?
Like a real house. Like the houses we're searching, right? Yeah. And dog goes on the bite. He says he surrenders. We can see the hands. And if you can't get your primary cover in there with you, or secondary cover, and safely approach and take the dog off, then the safest option is then to verbal out, right? And then we slow it down. He's contained. Yep. And I think that's another big factor is if we truly have containment, then to verbally out and then start to negotiate, de-escalate. My favorite thing to say is let's make his life uncomfortable in there, i.e. CS, some type of pepper ball, and have him willingly come out. That is way safer for everybody involved.
The argument's going to be my dog was on the bite. Person was in the room. Everything was safe. I had him under control. I outed. Now the person's in there and they reach behind him and find a weapon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the problem is you can counter argue this right to death. But if I verbal out my dog, we're taking cover and concealment and, we're slowing it down.
And we can start over. And that may change how we deal with the rest of the deployment. Guy goes back into being more of a threat. Maybe it's no longer a dog call. Maybe it's time to pull everybody out. SWAT goes in, gas goes in. Those kind of things happen. The suspect almost always determines what level of force and tactics we use.
Absolutely. It's called tactical repositioning. And if you guys aren't training that and you're not logging it, you're missing the boat.
Once again, this episode is brought to you by INUKSHUK Professional Dog Food. There's only one brand of dog food that we use and recommend. That is INUKSHUK Professional Dog Food. INUKSHUK was created for working dogs and continues to be the top choice for all working dogs, from hunting dogs to sled dogs, and of course, police canines. Whether it be detection or patrol canines, visit INUKSHUKPro.com, or you can find all of the formulas on Chewy.com.
Hey, everybody. We got a canine supervisor course coming up for all supervisors, and not just supervisors, the unit leaders. It's coming up in Elk Grove, California, April 28th, 29th, and 30th. I do this class with Bill Lewis. We go top to bottom. We do case law, selection and retention, defending your canine program, canine use of force. We get into some training, reality-based training, public relations. We do it all. You can find more information by going to tacticalk9, USA.com, or on my website, dtack9.com. Hope to see you there. So why don't we do this? Because 90% of the time, we weren't verbal outing our dogs, and we don't to this day. So I'm going to show video one. Or somebody's showing video one.
Yeah.
I'm not showing video one. Anyway, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to see video one. And that is pretty much like our textbook. We're, like Rich mentioned, we're in close proximity. Dog is on the bite. We enter the room. We have primary, secondary cover. Positions have already been assigned. We have a hands-on guy, and we move in. We take positive control of the dog. Hands-on guy grabs the other arm. We maintain cover on the suspect. We remove the dog, and then we finish cuffing. And it kind of answers your question, too, as far as, or your point to, well, what if they go to arm themselves? What if obviously they haven't been searched? What's the waistband like? And a lot of these things, and again, just to throw another variable in, is the information that we have at the time when we're going to make the arrest, right? Do we have information that there's weapons? What's the crime? Were there weapons used in the crime? But we like to get control of the suspect, and by taking an extra 2 or 3 seconds to move in and grab that arm and do it safely, we've elected to go that route, and so far for us, over the years, it has been successful.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Like, there's still a threat. The thing we learned from, and we should already know this, but the thing that we learned from Mike's podcast is canine handlers, officers always know when there's a threat. They always know they can talk about it with you or I. They can talk about it with their buddies. Where do they forget to talk about it? In the report. So, and we know we have a broad breadth of agencies. Somebody's going to show up to a call like this, and there's 14 people there, 14 cops there. We have another agency, think of Scott up in Sierra County. One guy's working. If he needs help, he's maybe calling the bartender that, might be armed to come help him, but there's no cover. There's a good chance the court is going to understand that he gets a little more leeway on time on bite because everything's a threat, and he can very clearly establish why this was a threat because he was solo, this person was fighting, all that. 14 people show up, 12 of them are lethal. You got a couple like there's a lot going on there. You better get your dog off the bite a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
So, but you have to explain it on both sides. You have to explain why the dog stayed on the bite until you got him off. What was the reason?
Yeah. And you're right, Rich. That's a really good point because I think what gets us in trouble is we don't articulate everything. I think we're getting hopefully better as an industry in that. But find yourself in court answering questions, and that always solves it, right? When you're a new officer, you're like, one paragraph. You go to court, you get drugged through the mud a couple times, and then suddenly you're like,
you're a novelist.
Dew point was, and the win was.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've established that there are times you're going to need a verbal out. It's just it is a reality. Plus, certifications and just the professional aspect of our industry and training. Verbal out is a necessity. So how are we going to train this thing? So we're going to go into some steps here, and we're going to start from scratch. Like, you just got a green dog. He's snapping at everything, and he doesn't know anything. And this is where I'm fortunate because the dogs that we've been getting are from you and Phil and guys that are putting all of this foundation on the dog so that when we get them, we're not having to start from square one. But I have started at square one with some dogs that we've gotten from brokers. So, Rich, if you would, for our listeners, if you could kind of go through the process that you use when you get a brand new dog and where you get them ready to give them to me.
Yeah, and like Greg said, this is our process. I'm not silly enough to not realize that there's other processes out there that work as well as ours, and some would argue better. This is what we do. When I started, when we were teaching a dog to let go of something, it was with a fur saver, and the company that I was training under said, when you want the dog to let go of something, you tell them to let go, and then you lift up on the fur saver until they no longer breathe. They spit that thing out, and then you let them down. That's how you
Done. And that's going to wrap it up. I hope you guys enjoyed listening.
You learned a lot from that. We'll see you later. So that's how we were taught to make dogs let go, and I think there's still some value in that, and we'll talk about that later, because some dogs just aren't going to compliantly let go of things because you want them to. So we start over at square one, and this is our way of teaching dogs to let go, and we start by making it fun. So the beginning is kindergarten. In video 2, which is the next video we're putting up, we do what we just call a toy trade. We get 2 toys that are exactly the same. It could be 2 balls on a rope, 2 tugs, 2 wedges, anything like that, and we back tie the dog. So have a 13-month-old dog, as all he wants to do is grab things. We back tie the dog. In the videos that we're showing, the dog is on a bite table, but the dog can be back tied to a light post, a tree, whatever you feel comfortable with. And the reason why we do that is it gives the handler a line of safety. The dog is back tied. There's a line that the dog can't get past in the beginning if you're nervous, and a lot of handlers won't admit that they are, but a new handler that's trying to play tug or especially ball on a rope, when you miss those things and the dog misjudges because it's very prey-driven, then your hands and your arms and everything are in the mix.
Can I interject
Absolutely.
one quick thing that we've learned over the years? If you're a new handler, do me a favor. Don't buy a black tug, number one, because we've run into this where we have a black tug, you're in a dark blue or a black uniform, and we wonder why dogs are coming in and accidentally grabbing us or grabbing the uniform. So we like to get a colored tug.
Yep.
And then secondly, invest in some gloves. And guys always fight me on this. They don't want to wear gloves. But in the beginning, the targeting of the dog might not be that great. And by a good pair of gloves, you can avoid a trip to the hospital. We had one new handler come in. His dog was very fast. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't. And he took one into the hand, and we lost him for a whole week out of the handler class that we made up at the end. But it was like, gosh darn, we lost a whole week. And if he had some gloves on, that could have been avoided.
Yeah, and keep in mind, especially the Eastern European dogs, they come off the plane wanting anything, ponytail, gloves, hand, whatever.
You've seen it all.
Yeah, those dogs come out a little rough. Anyway, back tie the dogs. Make it clear to them what the focus is. Let them see the tug.
Rich, why are you back tying him?
I back tie them for safety, for my safety, for the handler's safety, for the dog's safety. We know what it's like when they're first coming out of the chute and they're really excited. You lift up the tug. They don't need to hear a marker. They don't care. They're just trying to get it. So they're jumping all over the place.
You're going in circles and you're doing
and
one
your
of these
instinct,
numbers.
Yeah, your instinct is, even me, and I've been around it for a long time, is to be like, hey, you can't have that. Well, when you do that first, hey, you can't have that, the prey just got exciting. You just gave it wings. You just gave it feet.
Yeah.
Now the dog is really coming after it, and all you're doing is trying to get away. So like, hey, your line is there. My line is here. I have the toy. You can't get it until I put it into your bubble. And you'll see that in the videos. As we move on with that, the dog has one toy in their mouth. That toy starts to get boring, meaning I let go of it. I let all the energy go out of it. It's the tugging with the toy that makes it really fun for the dog. So I let that one go limp, completely let go. I bring out the second toy and I flirt with the dog with it. I shake it around, I move it around, I let the dog know, hey, that chicken is dead, but I have a live one right here waiting for you. And this is all prey. This is about chickens being dead. Like they think they're chasing a rabbit. They think they're chasing a squirrel, chicken, whatever it is. They're prey driven.
I got chickens. I'm
sorry, man. I'm sorry. So we bring out that second toy, make it come alive. As soon as the dog spits the first one, we mark it and give them the second one. And we do that repeatedly. And we're just teaching the dog, every time you let go, the thing that makes it start again is you spitting out the toy. And then we mark it and go right into the next repetition.
So one of the things that makes this successful is when I'm selecting a dog, I actually do this during the selection. Because if you get that son of a gun that is super possessive and you go, hey, here's another toy, it's dead. And he goes, thank you very much.
That's all I want.
I don't need anything else. I'm going to sit over here and gnaw on this thing, and I'm going to bite you if you come near me. Problematic for a number of reasons. So I want to make sure that the dog likes the game more than the toy. You can test possessiveness. So when we're testing, I'll do exactly what Rich said. We'll give them a toy. Play. That one goes dead. I got another one. And if they spit that one out and goes, I want the one that you have, this dog is going to be much easier down the line for everything, for training, and especially outs. And so that's just a little tip. If you're out selecting, maybe add that to your bag of things you test for.
Absolutely. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our video 4, and this is going to be adding a little bit of obedience in between the out. We still haven't told the dog the word out yet. We're just letting that second dog be the reason why they let go.
Second toy.
Sorry, the second toy be the reason why they let go. So we flirt with that second toy. They spit the first toy. We have it here. They can't cross the line to get to me. They want it. So now I add in some type of obedience, a sit, a down, something. Their butt hits the ground. Yes. Immediately they get the second toy. It could be a clicker, it could be a yes, it could be a good, whatever your marker is. But we're making them understand that they don't get the toy until they hear that word. So their butt drops on the ground, mark it, they get the toy. So now they're learning 2 things. I let go of one, there's promise for the second one, but I also have to have a little bit of impulse control, meaning before I get that second toy, my butt has to hit the ground. Their butt hits the ground, boom, they get that second toy. So now I'm killing a couple birds with one stone. I'm letting them understand that they have to let go for the play to continue, but now you have to do one other thing in that mix. They're not losing focus on the ball. I would say this is capping at this point. It's a short bout of capping. Their butt hits the ground. They're still looking at it. You can see in the video the dog is salivating. Yes, then they get that toy, and then we continue that progression, toy for toy trade with an obedience move in the middle of that. Still back tied, still on the bite table in this situation. The next one that we're going to do is going to be our video 5, and sometimes the hope of the second toy isn't enough and you need to add a little physical pressure. And I know there's several people in the industry that this is the only way they teach out. Dog's back tied. The dog is biting something. You say, dog, let go, out. And then they apply physical pressure. I have the leash hanging down in front of me. The ideal tool for this would be a dominant collar, slip lead, dominant collar, choke, anything like that. I tell the dog to out. The dog doesn't out. I apply pressure towards me, takes the dog's air away. The dog immediately spits the toy once they feel like the pressure is enough. As soon as they spit it, I again mark it, yes, and I give them the other toy. Still the same process, except for I'm adding a little compulsion in this one because this is a tough dog. It's not as willing to trade. Maybe your selection process wasn't stellar in the beginning and you got this dog that doesn't care about toy number 2. So we're saying, I get it, you don't want to let go, but you have to. Pressure's on. They spit that one, reward. The reason why I'm rewarding them, even though I added pressure to them, is I want the dog to understand if you do what I tell you to do, even if you don't love it, there's going to be a reward for that.
Couple things I want to make sure our listeners picked up on that. Number one, there's an old saying, don't name it till you love it. So Rich is, and this is where I see a lot of guys go wrong in the beginning, is they start going out, before the dog is offering the behavior. And now you're yelling out, and it's not happening. You're just watering it down. So once the dog is doing it predictably, then you start adding the command. And then one of our basic principles is we're not overlaying any compulsion, any corrections per se, or any physical manipulation until the dog has an understanding of the behavior. So now, once you've been trading for a while, you're doing out and doing it, you're adding the command when he's predictably. Man, you know what? We record these episodes after a long day of training, so I catch myself like even having trouble friggin' speaking. I've been friggin'.
You said it.
I've been yelling at people all day. Not like that. I come in here and I can't say anything. So make sure it's predictable, and then you're getting and then now the dog has a somewhat of an understanding. Yep. Now it's like we're going to hold you accountable.
Yep.
And that's the stage we're at right now.
Yeah, and that's whether it's pet dogs, police dogs, whatever we're doing. Like Gregg said, we teach them to love it, and that in the beginning for us, that's just luring dogs around with food. But in the outwork, you can see it in the videos. They see that second toy come up, and they can't spit the first one fast enough because they understand the game. Now, as I bring that second toy up, I say, out. Dog's already doing it anyway. Now I just overlay a word with that as we move forward. So then it's out. Dog's like, I spit it. I'm ready. Sit. Good. And they immediately get that toy. And again, there's been no compulsion most of the time on those situations because the dogs are so excited to get that second toy. If we are adding compulsion, like we talked about with the dog that needs that leash pressure, they're still getting the reward as soon as they let go of it. So they learn really quickly that out has value. keep in mind when we're correcting a dog, we're teaching the dog what they can't do. But when we reward the dog, we're teaching the dog what we want them to do, and we're making them want to do it. So corrections are great, makes them stop doing shit that we're tired of. But the reward has to be there for them to be motivated to do something that is valuable to us. We have to make it valuable to them. And then the last thing, and this is going to be video 6 and 7, you're going to see this, and there's still a lot of non-believers in the world about this, but we teach a tone out with the e-collar. So for us, we say Fido out, tone, and stem follows right after tone. And the benefit of that is, for whatever reason, and the dogs won't answer us, but the dogs, and I think it's because the collar is right here, they hear this tone the same way every time. It's always followed by stem, meaning if they don't do what I ask them to do with tone, I'm 100% moving my thumb up 3/4 of an inch to hit the stem, so there's never any gray area for the dog. When I say Fido out, tone, stem, the dog starts to want to race the stem, meaning they want to out as soon as they hear the tone, and then eventually as soon as they hear the verbal command. And that tone really helps instill in the dog that you better do it and do it right now. And is what we find is when we teach tone outs to the dog, that it's immediate and it's clear and there's no conflict between the handler and the dog, because for whatever reason the dog takes the tone as being something that's sent from the universe and not from the handler.
Why do you care about conflict?
I care about conflict because I don't like getting bit by dogs that know how to bite. And I think it's Ted Summers that says, don't be surprised when you teach a dog how to bite, and they do.
Yeah.
If you want to fight with a dog that you're teaching to fight humans,
sure,
right? And we've taught them to have good grips, and then you want to sit there and have conflict with them, like that's on you. If there's a better way to avoid that conflict, and we know that tone is the better way, and we're not going to get into tone on this podcast. You can look back at our podcast with Aaron Taylor and Eric Stambro. And Stambro has a new book out about tone and e-collar work without conflict. I recommend that you guys go back and listen to those. But we've learned, and we were both non-believers in the beginning, that tone definitely makes a big difference when it comes to reducing conflict with the handler.
100%. I'm a believer.
And that's the process we go through to make it fun for the dog to out. And again, somebody asked, I posted some videos, somebody asked, why would you do outs with a ball or out with a tug if you're having a problem with outs on the man? If you can't hit a T-ball, you're not hitting a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, right? If you can't get him to out a toy, how are you going to get him to out a man? That's way more valuable to the dog. That's going to create a lot of conflict. Let's get a whole bunch of success with the tug, a whole bunch of success with the ball on the rope, a whole bunch of success with the wedges, and then we'll move up to the human. But
yeah,
why would we start with the man? That's so hard.
Well, it would be like, do you teach sit with a decoy in front of you?
Right. No.
At this escalated level of drive, no. Okay, well, we're going to teach sit in an empty room, right? We'll get it there, and we'll start slowly move it up, and then we'll add a toy, and then eventually a decoy. Same with call-offs. Like, if you can't throw your toy out there and then get a call-off off your toy, then why are we throwing a decoy out there that should be more meaningful for your dog?
And I know one of the answers is going to be throw the decoy out there, throw whatever out there. And if you tell the dog to fucking do it, by God, they better do it. And you better add whatever pressure needs. And he needs to understand, I get it. And that was a way of thinking, and that had value at one point. But we send kids to kindergarten, and we sit down and we tell them, hey, 2 jelly beans and 2 jelly beans is 4 jelly beans. Nobody's telling them they're doing arithmetic. They don't start with calculus. They don't start with algebra. They start with counting jelly beans. And we make it fun so that they want to come back for first grade and second grade and third grade, right? And then at some point, we hold kids accountable for the behaviors that we expect from them. You have to show up. You have to sit quietly. But in the beginning, it's just fun. It's just fun to be at school. So with dogs, make it fun. And then once they learn it all, then hold them accountable.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like what we mentioned in the beginning, this is on the sport field, this is on the training field, and I can tell you this, that the training field and the sport field is way easier than when you get out on the street with your dog. And the way to make this behavior reliable is to not skip steps, because you can get there really fast. And so let's talk about the way we used to do it, and I like to say the industry, where, and yeah, I'm probably guilty of this way back in the day, right? I didn't know. Don't blame me. Now you know better. So now we have a responsibility. Responsibility of the dogs as well, and I always say they didn't sign up to be a cop, you did. So it's our responsibility to use the most humane methods possible and the most reliable. But back in the day, it was, hey, put the decoy 80 feet out there, and we're going to put a 70-foot line on him, and we're going to let him hit the end of that line, right? out at the last second, try to make it traumatic. There's the roll it up to a high 7 or a high 127, depending on your collar of choice. Send them out, blow them up, have them come back. And now, whenever we are using those types of methods, and hopefully you're not still doing that. If you are, hit me up, hit Rich up. We'd be happy to help you. But whenever we're using that, there's always Cameron called it fallout. I call it byproducts. But there's always residual of something that the dog learns in that process. A lot of times it is, if I'm on a back tie, I am not going out there, which could translate to your, to your long line work, especially if you're tracking. It could be, if I go out at all, I'm going to get blown up. So those dogs are the dogs you're like, Stellan, and they go, I don't think so. Stellan, yeah. All right, now I'm going to run down the field, and they slowly get going. So there's all kinds of things that fall out from that. But really, I mean, it's just teach it right. It takes longer. Because this process here, I mean, how long are you talking about with all that stuff?
I think you could do that reliably, get a reliable response out of that in a couple weeks of, less than an hour a day, far less than an hour a day. I mean, I guess you could go faster if you were doing several hours a day.
That's not long in a police dog's career.
No, and I think before you move on, I think you're right. This does take longer. But when you use this method, everything else that you teach the dog is going to take far less time. So teaching the dog to be a motivated student means that everything else you teach them down the line is going to be quicker. So if we're teaching a dog to bite, but we're doing these same tools and same methods for outing and playing, then that transfers over to detection. Now, if I have a dual purpose dog and it knows how to let go of a toy, I get more reps because I'm not fighting the dog. I'm not choking him off the toy. Now it's like, hey, let go. Let's do it again. Let go. Let's do it again. And the dog's like, hell yeah, I know how to let go. And I know what that means. It means we get to play again. Mm-hmm. So then now you have a student dog that wants to learn a lot of things and has an understanding of how it goes.
Yeah. So then, so now Rich has put that foundation in, or you're going to be putting that foundation into your dog. From here, when I get the dog is already reliably giving pretty good outs, right? So we introduce the man into this situation. The dog has an understanding of the command. You've put that in there. So when we ask the dog to out and the dog lets go, oftentimes they're still forward at the decoy, and we will out and then maybe pop a sleeve and give them a bite on the decoy for that. I don't like to stay there too long because the really drivey dogs start to get fixated, and then now the handler has very little value, and all the value is coming from the decoy, right? So what I mean by that is the decoy is rewarding the dog. There's no reward back for the handler. So I need to work a toy in with the handler. And I'm going to talk about, I know there's some of you probably listening to this go, I don't want a goddamn toy. I'll tell you why. I'm going to address some of these concerns at least concerns I've heard in the past of why you shouldn't use a toy in bite work. But we'll get there. Please hang in there with us. So I need to have the value now go on the handler side. So we out the dog, decoy takes a step back, we say here, and the handler now produces a toy. Now, I love to get the marker in before they bite the toy, but I'm a realist. Some of these dogs are really fast, right? So, but all I'm doing is showing, hey, there's value to coming back to the handler. So I'll show video 11 where it's out and then right back to a toy. And I don't want to stay here too long, right? Because I don't like a dog letting go of the decoy, turning around, mouth open, and you better shove something in that mouth or they're going to put something in there, right? Yep. And some of these dogs, again, they're fast, they're sharks, that can be a little bit dangerous for the handler on the early end. But it gives more value, shows the dog, hey, there is something back there for me. I quickly want to chain another behavior on there, and this is where Rich was already working on capping and outing and capping. So we will say out, and this is going to be video 12. Out, the dog comes back into a heel, and then at that point, once they get to the heel, now they get the toy. So now I'm just adding another step in there. So I've already created hope on the out that there's going to be something in there for them. When they out and they see it's not, then we're going to be like, no, just come right over here. Oh, here's how you get your toy, right? So, and these videos that we're showing, like these aren't like Rich and I didn't go out and video these today and be like, hey, we're going to show how that, and we're going to freaking bring a production team. All these videos are just videos from training.
With the trusty iPhone.
Yeah, with a trusty iPhone. There's nothing that I set up on this. This is just, and I'm terrible at at Instagram, and if you go to my DTAC K9 Instagram, you'll see I post something once every couple of weeks. I don't video it a lot, but this is just some videos we had in our archive. So if you want to pick them apart because they ain't perfect. And some of these handlers that you're going to see in these videos are handler class guys. They've had their dog for 4 weeks, and so they aren't perfect. So release, come back, get your toy. And then we go to kind of a variable reward, video 14, where sometimes they come back, there's no toy. Sometimes we go into a heel, then the toy appears. Sometimes we reward the release. Sometimes we make them do a few different behaviors. We keep them guessing. But we just kind of change some different behaviors on the backside of that. And, that way we want to make sure the dog is not expecting a toy every time he comes back. And this is where I see some handlers go wrong. Like, they had the right intention. They're like, I want to use positive reinforcement. I want when the dog comes back, I want to give him a toy. And they never leave that.
Right. And then the dog expects something, anything.
Yeah. And now we've got a problem. Hey, I'd like to thank one of our sponsors, Ray Allen Manufacturing. They've been engineering tactical and working dog equipment like harnesses, collars, leashes for military police for over 75 years. They are continuously innovating. I always like to say, this is not your dad's Ray Allen. They are always looking for the bigger and the better. We get all of our handlers now in the basic handler course deal directly with Ray Allen. We get our harnesses, leashes, tugs, e-collars, gloves, Rec Specs, Hearing Dog Pro. All of our good stuff comes from Ray Allen Manufacturing. Look them up, rayallen.com. I cannot recommend them enough. We only recommend people that we deal with, and these are good people, and they're in it for the right reasons. So because of that, rayallen.com. So you've got to quickly, again, and I say quickly, right? So I don't know. I can't give a number to it. Every dog is different. But once the dog is outing and coming back with a purpose, okay, now I'm going to chain another behavior in there. I'm not going to stay there too long, especially if they have their mouth open coming back. That's never a good thing.
Before you move on, can I ask you, and we see it a lot on the sport world, where the dog lets go the decoy and stays in some type of a guard position. Why don't you like the dog outing and staying at the suspect in the real world? So
we mentioned how we have over 10,000 deployments, right? And a couple thousand physical apprehensions at e-bites. I was teaching in the beginning years ago. Very good handler, very good dog. He goes out, he searches a schoolyard for 459 suspects, right? And so
burglary.
I'm sorry, burglary. And so the dog is searching the area. He goes in the bushes. He bites the suspect, who jumps up, who is 9 years old. And they had broken into school at 1 o'clock in the morning. He outs his dog. His dog goes into a down. And then immediately a 13-year-old pops up and tries to run, and the dog grabs the 13-year-old. And admittedly, he's like, I didn't know that there were 9, 13, and 15 breaking into a school at 1:30 in the morning. You know, when I was 9 years old, I was terrified to be out at 1:30 in the morning.
I bet they weren't criminals at 16, 17, and 18.
No, not at all. And the parents were like, he was doing what? Serves him right. You know, it's like, yeah.
It worked out then.
It worked out then.
Yeah.
And so the I don't like the out and then the staying there because of that reason. There's a couple reasons. There's that aspect of it. Now, I like to out and have the dog come back where I have physical control of the dog. And then secondly, if you out and down quite a bit, a lot of times your decoys aren't going to like it, because if the dog decides to say, I think I'll go for another nip, sometimes the closest thing is their feet. And that's problematic in a training environment. So we like the verbal out and then come back to us. But having said that, there's times we verbal out and then halfway we down them. Again, mixing it up, right? Because there's going to be situations. You almost have to train for everything that is unforeseeable. Right?
I think the other thing, and you kind of went over it, but just keep in mind, like prey-driven dogs, really drivey dogs, if we selected properly, we out them and we leave them there. And then the suspect does something that we didn't plan for, which is almost always,
sure.
Ow, scream, I dropped my wallet, I need to grab that, I'm running back in, whatever it is. Now the dog is left making decisions on their own because we left them in such close proximity to the suspect, who are, I mean, at this point, they're being agreeable to what we're asking them to do, but anything could happen that the dog could say, is that my go sign? Sure looks like my go sign. And they're looking for a go sign. So anything, we can force a lot of compulsion on them, make them be really good in that situation, or we can just pull them away and bring them back to us.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, we talked about like the trialing and apprehensions and stuff on the front end, and it's just to show that we've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And we've learned from them. And honestly, Rich, this is like the whole reason we do this podcast is if you're in another agency somewhere or you're a new handler, hey, learn from all the stuff and all the crap that we did wrong.
Yeah.
You know, that's why we're here. So,
and we get the benefit of, the 100 dogs that you have as, all the teams that you're training and be like, hey, that deployment didn't go as well as that one. What made this one better? After actions, being self-critical is what helps us grow in the situation.
100%. And it's a changing environment too. Like you said, what flew maybe 20 years ago is not flying today.
Nor should it.
Nor should it. So now we're here. So we're getting verbal outs. The dog's coming back. One thing I didn't touch upon, but I want to make sure it's clear. I really want to have a set of rules for the dog. And in those rules is markers. So one of the rules I have when we introduce a toy is number one, the dog shall not molest me for it. So I should be able to put it under my arm. I should be able to touch his nose. He is not going to bite it until I mark it. Once I mark it, it's free game. This is crucial, and especially if you're going to use your toy on your outs. We get that rule in really quick as we can. So the only time they get it is when we mark it. So if I out my dog, and I don't have a video on this, I wish I would have, I can have my toy out, and as he's coming back, if I don't mark it, he comes into a heel. He doesn't touch that toy. And that's going to help us down the line when we start talking about some of the other
Actually,
events.
if you go back to those earlier videos that I posted on the bite table, you see that the toy is sitting in front of the dog. And the dog, especially when he goes into the sits or the downs in between the toys, he's not allowed to get that toy until he hears the marker. So that foundation all starts early on. And again, if you get a new dog and it's a green dog to you, put everything away, grab some food, and load a marker. If you need to know what a marker is, you can go back to one of several of our past podcasts, or you can go look at Michael Ellis or anybody else that's out in the world that's teaching a marker. But the best thing that you can do for your training with your new dog that doesn't know anything from anything is load a marker and teach your dog that it doesn't get food, it doesn't get the toy, it doesn't get anything from you until it hears yes or the click or whatever it is that you're using. Because just the presentation of the toy better not be what gets your dog biting it.
Well, and so you do all this work on the front end. Don't screw it up by now outing and just having your toy out and him coming back and grabbing it. Like, keep that rule in place. If you started it, and you should have, you need to, make sure you're consistent with it throughout the dog's training, because we see a lot of that where the dog's coming back. I just got my tug sticking out. He just grabs it. I never marked it. Now we're watering that down, right? You're breaking your own rules. And that's what we see a lot of with handlers is we set these rules up, and then throughout the process, we start violating our own rules, and then we get upset at the dog when the dog kind of deteriorates.
Absolutely.
So, all right, so now we got the dog outing. If I'm going to mark it, they get the toy. If I don't mark it, they don't get to bite anything, right? So they have an understanding. They're coming back to me reliably. So the next step is we're going to start adding cover officers, because now let's put this into, like, that's great for the trial field. That's great for the training field. But real world tactics, if we are going to do a verbal out, I want my primary and secondary cover generally in front of me, right? Especially if my dog is coming back, I could have my gun out. Now I'm split attention where I'm watching my dog. Am I really focusing on the suspect? Am I focusing on his hands, waistband, his immediate area, which is what we teach? No, I'm carrying too many tasks at one time. So have your lethal in front of you, or your primary and secondary, as we call it now. Yep. It's the lethal is not a friendly term. Ooh. So I've been working on that. So primary and secondary covers in front of you. Verbal out. Now the dog has to search you out and come back, and you're going to see videos 15, 16, and 17 where we're having the dog release and then come back to the handler, running by cover. At first, if you want to do this and do it online and offset yourself from your cover, and we've had dogs like run back and then suddenly just like heel to primary cover number one, and you're like third in the stack. So you'll see some of our guys are tapping on their kydex a little bit, or tapping their leg, just to kind of give that dog the target of like, hey, come back here, because it's not intentional. let's face it, we all look alike. We're in the same damn uniform. And a lot of times,
especially from the waist down, right? Which is what the dogs are seeing.
A lot of times there's just these 3 ugly, bald-headed guys with the same uniform on, and the dog is like, give me a break.
Yeah.
Like,
which one?
Yeah, which one? So you can help the dog out in that manner. So in one of the videos, you see the guy tapping his leg. Again, that is not because he needs to get the dog back. It's just, hey, buddy, I'm back here. Just help him out a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're outing, coming back past cover. Sometimes I'm going to mark it and give him a toy there. Sometimes I'm going to heel him off and give him a toy. It's really important that you use a variable reward on this, so the dog's hopeful but isn't demanding and doesn't expect it every single time. I'm rising his hope that he may get it. And we've talked about, I think we talked about with Cameron Ford, I don't know if we did or not, how variable reward is actually a more powerful reward structure than fixed reward, fixed ratio, if he's always getting the toy. So vary that. And keep the dog guessing. From there, and this is the test to see if everything comes together, and if we've used our markers properly, I'm going to show video 18 and 19, where the dog is coming back after an out, full speed, and you'll see the speed we've developed on the recalls. And again, a lot of this is because we're dealing with really motivated dogs, and they're in the hopes that they'll potentially get a toy at the other side of it. When they're coming back, when they're halfway back, we have the handler draw aggressively their gun and stick it out in front of them. And if we've used our markers properly and we've used a variable reward structure, the dog's just going to come sliding right back into heel and not think twice. If we've been lazy in our markers and lazy in our reward, and we're in a fixed ratio and he's always getting a toy, you're going to stick that gun out there, and guess what?
It's going to be a toy.
It's going to be a toy. And he's going to grab that thing. And so that's a good point. So when you practice this, unload that daggone thing. Like, do not practice this with a loaded gun. So
probably better off with a red gun, blue gun, whatever you're using. Something that's not shooting live rounds.
Correct. So that's kind of the process.
And let's go back on that even a little bit more, because so frequently we're pulling up the toy and we're rewarding it right hand, left hand, whatever. So at some point, the presentation of the toy is going to look a whole heck of a lot like the presentation of your gun. This is where the marker, might have a drinking game going on again here. This is where the marker matters. Doesn't matter what I pull up. And we did talk about this with Cameron. I pull up the ball on the rope, I pull up a tug, I pull up a gun. None of it's yours until you hear the marker. None of these things matter. I can pull up, and we just got done training a nasty Rottweiler, and in the video I have tugs, wedges, and this dog is a machine for prey. And he had to learn, like, you don't get any of this stuff until you hear yes, and then sky's the limit for you. You can have it all. But I should be able to pull up whatever I want. And just think about in your life all the things that look like toys to a dog. If they just think that they get carte blanche to have that stuff, then you're going to have a problem. Coffee cups look like toys. Some of your equipment, gas mask bags look like toys. There's a lot of stuff that looks like a toy to a dog. If they think that every time you hold it up, they get to bite it, there's a problem. That's where the marker comes in. You can see all kinds of stuff, and you don't get it until you hear yes. And if you fuck up and say yes while you have your gun drawn, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, well. And yeah, I mean, breaking it down, there's a lot of little details to this thing, right? And if you haven't figured out already, if you are a handler, you already know this. If you want to be a handler, the devil's in the details. And it's all these little steps and you being consistent in these details that bring it all together. And you'll be successful in the end if you do that. If you're sloppy, if you're inconsistent, then yeah, this could be problematic, right? That's when you're going to get an inconsistent performance. So just like everything else in the dog world, just be consistent, stick to the details. Keep those rules the same. You don't bite it until I mark it. And if it's in my hand, you don't get to just grab it. If it's under my arm, you don't get to grab it. You don't molest me for the toy. If it's in my pocket and you have access to it, you don't get to grab it.
Absolutely.
Cool.
And then somebody's going to ask, and this was the last thing. You're talking about variable reward. Are you taking your tug on the street with you?
Oh, I'm glad you said that. Generally not. And that's why, we always choose a black tug because it's tactical, yet we always leave it in the car. There's few exceptions that we could come up with. There's guys that have dogs that are just loading up on the perimeter, and sometimes they use a tug to satiate. Be really careful with that. But generally, I don't bring the tug at all with me once we deploy.
I know a couple guys that carry a flat fire hose, just because it's easy to store. And upon occasion, you need a tug for something, right? You want to, the dog, like you said, the dog's been out there too long. It's starting to kind of boil over. Or, you're calling your dog back through what would be dicey for the dog, a bunch of cover, press, something weird happens. And you're like, hey, I want to let you know that there's something on this end to avoid you making any bad decisions out there. Sometimes having bait, like when my dog was biting the suspect underneath the house, I was probably 60 feet away in the crawl space. She was debating as to whether or not she wanted to let go and come back to me. So I shined the flashlight. I did have the fire hose on me. I shined the flashlight on there, kind of gave it a whack on the floor, made it clearer for her to come back, because that wasn't one where I could, gain space on her. So sometimes, yeah, most of the time, no. And we're definitely not using it as a reward on the street. It's not like training. Training is where we're training. On the street, we're not standing out there in a real life situation with a tug trying to get the dog back to us.
And if you've done a variable reward system, then it's not going to be an issue. If you're always luring where the dog is seeing you with the tug and that's the only way you can out your dog, now we've got a problem. And, I think we had an officer safety issue. I don't like it. You haven't trained the behavior properly. So, if you've used a variable reward, then the dog is just hopeful when they come back. And then, at the same time, if I say, loss from a distance and they say, maybe I'm not, then I'm on the stem or tone stem or however you've laid the foundation, because they already understand that the behavior is to come back to me. So now that I've taught it, I expect it, and then I can give a correction if they're not going to do it.
Yeah, and just so we can reiterate, we start with all the fun stuff, the toys, the switch out, all that. At the end of the day, because we've taught them to understand it, we've taught them to like it, they know the process. Now when I say do it, now you have to do it. Like now we're not negotiating anymore. There doesn't have to be a prize involved. We taught you how to have fun. You're not in kindergarten anymore. Now we're in high school. Do it because I said to do it. If not, there's going to be repercussions for your actions.
Yeah, one other thing that we didn't discuss that I think is important on the front end, oftentimes we'll go to a wedge. So we'll get guys that'll go, my dog won't take a toy when the man's out there. And it's almost like this badge of honor, right? Like, he ain't about that world. Like his world is all about biting a man. He ain't taking no goddamn toy. Well, it's usually because the handler's a dud with that toy. And so, it's funny because I'll have a guy in a sleeve, and the dog would much rather have a sleeve and mess around with the sleeve than a tug. And it's a couple-fold. It's number one, that sleeve has been conditioned to be much more meaningful, and it's bigger. So I have had handlers start out and they hold a sleeve to get the dog to want to engage them. They're not putting it on. Yeah. Let's clarify that. At no time should you be in a bite suit outing your dog back to you to take a bite. And this brings up another good one, so remind me on that topic. And then also, you shouldn't be wearing a sleeve and outing and then coming back and you're catching your own dog. If I'm using a sleeve, I'm using it like a tug, and then I'm quickly trading down to a wedge, and then eventually to a tug. And it's all about the interaction. We're cops, and we're like, here, good. Yeah. And that's our play. Versus you got to act like a decoy. That dog comes in, give him that toy, spin him around, slap him on the side. Like, they like the rough stuff, And if you're going to be a dud, it'll be like, I'd rather play with that guy right over there.
Yeah, and I would say, like, the dog doesn't go into the chicken coop to eat chickens. The dog likes killing them. They thrash around. They squawk a lot. It goes dead. They move to chicken number 2, shake them around, squawk, it's dead, move to chicken number 3. You come back to 30 chickens dead in your hen house, and maybe one of them got eaten, but the joy was in the thrashing. So you have to be a live chicken. You have to be the thing that makes it exciting. It's not the toy, it's the interaction with the toy that makes it valuable.
Yeah. Hey, I've done this too in the past, where I set up decoy 1 in front of me and then decoy 2 behind me. So it's like 180 degrees, so I can go out here, reward them with that bite, out here, reward them with that bite. I've stopped doing that years ago.
Because that's usually where the lieutenant stands.
That's exactly right. I don't like the aspect of your dog coming off a bite and then self-rewarding on anybody else around, because that's going to generally be your cover officers. If you have no choice and you're working on your outs and you're doing it, okay, it's got to be short-lived, in my opinion. I don't like it. I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. But just be careful with the multiple out, bite that guy, out, bite that guy. It's not a good behavior in the long run.
No. It's fun in the beginning. Like, make sure your dogs can switch around.
And you get success, right? Like, that's the thing.
It's sexy.
It's freaking good Instagram stuff if you're into that kind of thing.
I have to be.
True.
That's awesome. That's a full hour on just outing. And we were talking about this before we started. Like, hey, can we talk about outs for an hour? Oh, yeah, we can talk about outs for probably another hour. We can talk about more legal cases. We can talk about the need to. We can talk about all the options. And we still got a couple minutes left. What are all your options on outing a dog? Can you go over that one more time?
Sure, absolutely. So every handler should have a cadre of what their dog responds to the best. So we'll go through the handler class, and your top three might be different from another person's top three, might be different from another person's top three. Go to YouTube. It's easy to find a lot of dogs that have not let go on the street, and that's problematic. So number one, verbal out. Again, we train that with all our dogs, and suspects in thick bushes. You can't get your primary cover in a room with you. Attic, crawl space, there's a great distance, all perfectly reasonable to use a verbal out at that time. Number two is the verbal out, where I have a hold of my dog's collar and I tell him to let go, and he opens his mouth and I pull him back, right? So a verbal out with positive control. On that note, if you have back pressure when you're doing your verbal out, which a lot of us do because we get excited when we get our first couple of bites on the street, you've now made that verbal out almost impossible, or at least very difficult. So when you do that technique, you can't have tension on that collar. So be mindful of that. Number two is what we'll call a lift off, where we'll take the fur saver and we'll roll it up, and we basically take the dog's air, lift up and forward, working the opposition reflex. The dog opens his mouth and he pulls him back. Real quick on that, because here's a controversial topic. I've had in training, and Rich, you and I have talked about this. Like, I don't like to train and say the out command and then do that, because when you grab the dog and you start putting pressure on them, they tend to start learning to bite harder to avoid the lift off. And now you're pairing your out command with that behavior, and that can be problematic. However, on the street, you have a duty once you grab the dog to give him a verbal out. So you can't play the game of like, I'm going to wait.
Almost there.
He's almost there. Okay, I got the lift off. Okay, that was 10 seconds before I said out, and the courts are going to go, well, why didn't you just give him the verbal command out?
Yeah.
10 seconds ago. Now there's deliberate indifference. Now it's problematic. So something to be aware of, but we've got the verbal out, the grab the collar out, the lift off, obviously the breaker bar, we're a big fan. And again, my dog outed every time on the street until he didn't. And he happened to pick a Winco parking lot with a bunch of people walking around behind me. So you've got to have these backups in place. Another out would be using your leash, much in the same fashion as your fur saver. Again, basically up and forward and taking the dog off the bite. But that's just a few, and there's other methods. I'm not a big flanking guy.
No,
I don't like what
not
it
if you have a
does.
serious dog.
What it does with the relationship with your dog, it makes your dog leery of you being behind it. You're grabbing the flank and you're twisting, and then they're like, ow, and they turn around to address that pain, and then you pull them back. Hasn't been one of my favorites. I've never actually trained it. And then number two, there's that little throat pinch.
Yeah.
I know there's a name for it. Again, I'm not...
In old school policing, we call that C-clamp, but I'm sure
C-clamp.
there's
Okay.
probably a better name. There's probably a better name for that.
And I've talked to veterinarians, and they're like, man, there's just so much like stuff you can damage there. And so I don't mess around with that. I've seen it, but not one of the things we teach.
And keep in mind, these are all, again, progressions that we made. We didn't really believe in the break stick when it first started out. We were reluctant to use it.
That thing's dumb.
Yeah, why are we going to use that? Teach your dog an out.
No, wait a minute.
Because sometimes this makes a hell of a lot more sense. And it's super effective. Like, it just works really well. We use the Serious Canine break stick. Shout out to those guys. They're not a sponsor or anything, but they make a really good product. And it's made in a way that's really useful because it's so flat that you're able to slide that right in behind the molars. It is really, really effective.
It's a good one. Zach from Echelon Canine also makes one. I saw it on Instagram. So there's multiple variations, and they all basically accomplish the same thing. Key is, if you're going to use these things, you need to practice. Make sure you do it with someone that's used them before.
And the e-collar.
Yeah. Well, with the breaker bar, real quick, you go behind the teeth. don't start hitting teeth. You go behind the teeth. They don't like the metal in their mouth, and then you can kind of go right down the throat a little bit. That's why it's effective. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Grab the collar, say los, it doesn't happen, overlay the e-collar, and that was my go-to if my dog didn't out. Usually I grab the collar, I say los. Majority of the time, vast majority of the time, he would let go. I've had to touch the e-collar a couple times. This was pre-breaker bar. But like everything in electronics, you should not be relying on really any one thing, because there's been times where my e-collar wasn't working. Usually I'd screwed it up. That's a whole nother subject. Yeah. E-collar episode where we can go through all the how you screw that up. But if you're riding around with a dog in your car at this moment and you don't have at least 3 different ways to get your dog off the bite, you need to get some education. Again, reach out to us. We'll be happy to talk to you. But really, this is your trainer's responsibility, and I'm questioning the training at that point if all they're doing is teaching you to out your dog from a distance and you have never gone hands-on and actually had to take your dog off.
Or vice versa, if you're only doing it hands-on and you haven't done it from a distance.
Yeah, again, we got the 2 camps. You should kind of be in the middle. Yep. And I know they're changing the guidelines here in California for canine deployments and the post certifications. They are going to add a physical liftoff because there's so many handlers out there that struggle that haven't done it, can't do it properly.
Good stuff.
All right, I like it.
That's the end of us. In the meantime,
train hard
and be safe.